there's been a huge issue within the AAA gaming industry, particularly this last year, with a lot of major studios failing to make back their budget on AAA releases. And it's gotten to the point where gamers have started to abandon a lot of these latest releases because, well, they're just not as good as a lot of the independent games coming out or even retro games. So much so that outlets like GameStop, for instance, have decided to focus some of their locations on leaning into the retro gaming market because that's something that gamers actually want. But despite seeing the writing on the wall, many executives within the AAA gaming sphere still understand that there's an issue right now with the way things are going with their current business model, but they're still continuing along that way because they don't know what else to do for some reason. Assassin's Creed executive producer reveals AAA games need to sell 10 million copies to break even. Now, I know a lot of these major studios have been having trouble breaking even with their latest releases, but 10 million, that's pretty excessive because some of them, like Star Wars Outlaws, for instance, I was thinking if they sold 5 million copies, that would have been a break-even point, but I guess they only sold around 1 million copies, or at least that's according to some speculation, insider information, and rumors and other things like that, that they only sold around 1 million copies of it. And I was thinking like, okay, if they got around 5 million, that's still far to their goal, but not as bad as needing to sell 10 million. Mark Alexis Kute, the executive producer for Assassin's Creed franchise, revealed that AAA games need to sell around 10 million copies in order to break even. During an interview at XDS24, Kute discussed how video game development costs are increasing year over year. And a lot of this is their own doing because they're adding a lot of features and other things like that to some of their major releases. And it's stuff that people aren't necessarily asking for, but they're doing that anyway because they think that they need to ramp up the budget year over year in order to sell their games. And as we've seen with the retro gaming market, that's not actually the case. As long as it looks decent enough and the gameplay is competent, then people are going to play it, but they think that they need to actually increase their budgets for every new release. And something like that is just not sustainable from a business standpoint. He shared, "We are in a complex and tough economic situation right now, at least in the games industry. We've all seen our costs rising, our profits shrinking. In a way, there's a lot of very, very intense competition." And like I was saying, this is their own doing. They don't have to increase their costs like they're doing, but they are. Now, I understand with inflation, the way the global economy is working, that costs are going to rise, but not to the level that these studios are actually increasing the cost on their games. But the cost of building games has probably increased tenfold since the first Assassin's Creed and the one that's coming out this year. Both cost, complexity, amount of people has probably risen by a factor of 10. And they don't need to do that at all either. When you look at who succeeds, at least in the AAA space, so what I'm going to say applies to mostly premium games, more traditional kind of AAA games. You have 10 games in any given year that will sell about 10 million copies, he continued. So he understands that not many games are actually going to sell what they say they need in order to be profitable, yet they continue to churn out a lot of these games. I would think instead of spending a few $100 million on a game, so let's just throw out some numbers just for the sake of argument. Don't spend $300 million on one game that needs to sell 10 million copies in order for it to be successful. Why not instead produce 3 $100 million games or maybe 6 $50 million games? Because at that rate, you don't need to sell a whole lot of copies in order to be profitable. Not every one of them needs to be profitable. In fact, with a budgets like that, if you have one that just takes off or maybe a couple that takes off, well, then suddenly you offset the losses for all those other ones. But it seems to be that a lot of these major studios are kind of putting all their eggs in one basket with their current business model. And I don't think that's really smart from that perspective. He then explained, the reason I'm quoting the 10 million copies kind of mark is from what I've seen and how I've seen costs, the costs of competition and everything leaks in our industry. So you have privileged information on where the competition is going. Most likely, I estimated that 10 million copies, give or take 2 million copies, is mostly what you need to break even. But you have only 10 games that breach that every year. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying. Instead of having 10 games that need to sell or that sell 10 million copies a year, like if that's kind of their benchmark right there, and he's saying only 10 million or 10 games can actually reach that mark, and that's why only 10 of them are going to be profitable within the AAA gaming space. What about how many games each year maybe break the $5 million mark, or not $5 million, 5 million copy mark that sell that. Because I'm sure it's significantly more so if they reduce their budget by half on a lot of these games, which is probably pretty feasible considering all the bloat that they're adding to these games and the crazy production times and stuff for them. I can see them having more profitability with something like that as opposed to the current model. Now, with the way the AAA gaming space is going with this, you can see a lot of these companies are either going to have to adapt to the current environment and the realities of the market, or they're just going to go under, and then the ones remaining are going to have to adapt to it. But either way, things are going to have to change within the AAA gaming space because, like I was saying, you can't just increase your budget year over year or release after release and then expect to turn profitability, because there is a certain market cap, and even though it's pretty big within gamers, it still does have a ceiling, and right now they've pretty much reached the ceiling and they keep going beyond that, and it's just not working out for them. Kute then broke down what those 10 games look like. Out of the 10, you'll have probably 3 sports games, you'll have 4 games on established franchises, and probably 2 or 3 games that are surprise hits coming from nowhere. But that leaves very, very little room and wiggle room for success. So I'm trying to enter the Assassin's Creed franchise through that. He added a little bit later, he noted that Ubisoft is not only competing against other developers, but also competing with themselves and their own back catalog. He talks about how they're competing against their back catalog because if they released a game a few years ago, an Assassin's Creed title, and they put some improvements on it and it still looks pretty good even by today's standards, and then that gets sold on a discount for like, hey, $20 here, then they have a new release that's being sold for $80. People are going to look at the two and be like, well, yeah, this is the new one, but the other one still looks pretty good, so I might as well just play that. So they're competing with themselves in that sense. And also they're competing with themselves in the perspective that he said only probably 10 games can be hit the 10 million sales mark each year, yet they're going to release several games on their own, basically knowing they have to either knock them all out of the park, or they're going to take a loss on more releases than not. So that doesn't seem to be a smart business model either. Maybe they should limit the amount of games that they're releasing each year, or do what I was saying, which is to reduce your budgets and just release more stuff out there. And then you just need a few of them in order to be successful for that to actually be profitable for them as a company. Kute comments are damning for the company as its recently released AAA Star Wars Outlaws game allegedly only sold 1 million units in its first month. When asked about the current sales curve, CEO Yves Guillemot completely punted. He was asked by a BMO investor on Star Wars Outlaws, obviously off to a slower start than you guys wanted. Can you provide a little color into the sales curve there more recently? Have you guys started to see things pick up? Can you talk about any of this? Okay, so just asking about how the game was going, and it was terrible. So much so that after the game was released, a lot of investors sold Ubisoft stock and their value tanked because they weren't happy with the numbers that they were seeing internally. Guillemot replied on Outlaws, what we can say is that the 3 title updates that we've delivered at the same time, we've been observing substantial positive community sentiment improvements. I'm going to say BS on that one. They've been getting savaged online with a lot of people upset with the way things have been going with Ubisoft. Even their own investors are upset with them as a company. The biggest update is still to come by November 21st, and it will come on the same day as the first big story pack and the launch for Steam. Yeah, and their Steam launch was atrocious for them. Just mere thousands of people. I forget the exact number. It was maybe just like a few thousand people were actually playing on Steam, so not really good. I have to double check those figures though, but it was pretty low for them, something that they did not want. So we are putting ourselves in a position to have a must-play game that should address mainstream audiences for the busy season. Also, to be a long-term seller. Maybe they could actually see some more growth in the game, but selling only 1 million copies in the first month and they need to sell 10 million altogether, they're not going to do it with this game. He continued, it has great quality and the team wanted to make sure that we will remove a few frictions and then implement some gameplay mechanics that will certainly delight the players. Yeah. Okay. So, oh, it actually was worse than I thought because it has the Steam player count for Star Wars Outlaws. So it didn't even have a couple thousand. It was less than 1,000. So I knew it was bad. Yeah, this is way worse than I thought for that. Okay, but that's Ubisoft specific and not necessarily AAA gaming industry as a whole. But a lot of my points still stand for this, though, in that a lot of these issues that they have are completely self-inflicted. And I already laid out what I think they should do. They should produce more games, but with significantly lower budgets. I mean, because we've seen that this last year, Power World, that was like what, $10 million budget or something like that, and that sold 20 million copies. Black Myth Wukong, that was made for less than $100 million. That sold over 20 million copies. So the thing to take away from those is there were games that people like. They don't necessarily need to have the latest and greatest technology involved with them. They just need to be fun games that are competently made, and they will sell. That's what a lot of these AAA gaming industry people don't seem to understand. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they lack creativity. So the only thing that they can do, or the only thing that's in their power, because you can either be more creative and get better at your job, or you can spend more money on it and try to maybe sell games that way. And I think that's kind of the path they're taking. But we've seen time and time again with a lot of indie games that they seem to take off because the people behind it are competent enough at their job and they have a passion for it and they have creativity. So they can't throw money at something and hope that that fixes it and makes things better. They have to do creative things in order to actually make something that people want to play. And that's something that I think a lot of these studios need to start doing, is hiring people like that instead of just hiring people because they check the right boxes. And until they start doing that, I'm afraid this is going to be more of a path for them. And even if Ubisoft does try to fix things in the interim by going private, that's not going to fix the problem because the same leadership is present at the company either now or after they go private. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you think that AAA games should continue on how they're doing and just hope that things pick up for them? Or do you think they should do more what I'm suggesting in that they should produce more games but at a smaller budget? Comment below, let me know. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest entertainment news. And don't forget to click that like button and share this video out there because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.